Hello, this is Amy, and welcome to the podcast again. This is an episode of Real Talk, and Real Talk is a series of the podcast within the series of the podcast where we have real conversations with stepmoms and stepkids. My guest today is my new friend, Laura Ballet. Did I say your name correctly? I
Yeah,
usually ask
Laura
before.
Ballet, just
Very
like the
good. I try to ask beforehand, but it's a Friday morning that we're recording this. Apparently, I'm not all the way connected with my brain cells.
day.
Welcome to the podcast, Laura.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Happy to have you. So, we're going to talk about step parenting. To confirm for the listeners, you and I are both step parents.
Yes,
All right.
I am.
All right. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us what part of the world you're in and maybe the story of how you came to be a step parent.
Yeah, I have a pretty cool story about this. So I live in Connecticut, East Coast, right in between New York and Boston, of course. My mom, who lives in Florida, kept calling me for about a year and telling me that she found the man I was going to marry. He was like the boy version of me, as she put it. And I was like, that's great, mom. I'm not coming all the way to Florida and, starting all that up. And she's like, no, trust me. He had been going through the divorce and all of what he was going through and had two beautiful, beautiful young girls. So time went by. And finally I said, okay, I'm coming down anyways. It was my birthday. And he was actually working at a restaurant that was the best friends of my mom. And I walked in, took one look and knew. I just knew. Yes, of course, there's external visuals, right? Those
Right.
cues, but I just knew, and I felt it right in the very core. And we met that day and started to spend time together. Started going back to Florida and visiting, and we had like about a year of a courtship. And I knew he was the one when one evening he said, "I love how your mind thinks." And I thought that was super cool. And we just started hanging. And 15 years later, here we are. And
Ta-da!
I moved right in with my two stepchildren, but they're my babies. They were my girls from the moment I met them. We actually fought to have them and take care of them. And we've been a family ever since. And they're now quite big.
So, you've been married 15
Yeah, we've
years.
been married. We've been together going 14 full years. We're getting ready to head into the 15th year. Yeah, and
Okay.
we've been married for almost all of those years.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to ask you like some particulars, but
Yeah.
you can tell me to bugger off if at any point
No.
you don't want to answer. So he went through a divorce. He was
Yes.
married before, but the girl's mom, is she still alive and a part of their life?
She's alive and not really a little bit.
Okay.
She's a whole story that we could have a whole show, right, based on those styles of personalities. She just is a bit of a narcissistic human being and really still to this day comes first. She's, I want to say, not very aware of it. My youngest one hasn't spoken to her in quite a while, but she's a spitfire, very spiritual, very intellectual. She knows her place in life, her decision. And my oldest one has somewhat of a communication, but it's not the best. But
Okay.
they all try, we've tried, but it was not a pleasant experience in the beginning, to say the least.
Okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Were you married before?
No, two
Okay.
very long-term relationships, but
But no
way to
marriage. So you didn't bring any other kids into the relationship. You did
no.
not have kids. Did you add kids? Is it just still the two, or did you guys add more kids?
No, it's just the two.
Okay.
Always
I
wanted
shouldn't say just,
two.
but I wanted to get a picture of the
Yep.
t I wanted to get,
Yep. No
I
babies.
just wanted to get a picture of the family, like not to minimize. That's a beautiful size family, and my
Yeah.
wording there was not great. I was really trying to just get a picture of the family tree. So when you think back to like not every like so if you look at Hollywood, they want us to believe that all little girls dream of growing up and getting married and having a wedding and kids. But I find that to not actually be the case. But if you many girls are dreaming of being, astronauts and baseball players and whatnot. The
Right.
so but if you think back to when you before you met him and before you got married, and how you saw your life. Did you have any thoughts at that point of step parenting, step parents, step parenthood, that it would
Mhm.
ever be a piece of your future? Had you ever thought about it at all?
One thing I did think about for whatever reasoning when I was young is I knew I would not adopt.
Okay.
And I really did want to have I wanted to have like three kids. And, yes, that's typical. I didn't think, oh, by this point, I want to be married and have kids and this is their names and all of that too deep. But yes, I thought about getting married and of, yes, having the wedding and a home and having it filled with lots of little humans. And then when my husband and I met, we still gently talked about maybe having a child of our own very quickly. My youngest at that point was burned pretty badly. She's fine now, of course, but she was in France visiting her grandparents, and she took went near a flame. Her dress caught on fire, and her leg and a little part of her tummy, and she was in a burn.
Physically burned. Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
All
physically
right.
burned. And so when I was just getting her, she was just moving in. So we were just becoming a family. It was after the summer, and she needed me. And it was
Yeah.
because I'm older, I got married older. I would have really had a child much older. I made a decision to not have a child of my own and really take care of my little one. She needed it, and
Yeah.
was the right decision. So yes, I thought about all of the probably all of the seeding that gets into our minds as little girls, but wasn't ever um, sure of how it would have played out. But when we were in our 20s and talked, if I remember thinking if I fell in love with a gentleman and he already had children, absolutely, I would have been cool with that too.
Oh, so you did have that thought. All right. That
Yep.
was what I was trying, because there is a thread that goes through blended family communities where people will say things like, no one ever dreams of becoming a step parent. But I actually find that when I talk to people, some people actually do think about it, and they're like, yeah, no, I thought about it, and I didn't have, maybe they had a step parent or they had friends with step
Mhm.
parents. And so that's the reason I began to ask, like,
Yeah.
had you ever thought about it? Because people do have a wide variety of opinions and concepts about it. And where I weigh in is that A, I was clueless when I was in my 20s. But two, is that, the preconcepts that you have, like the ideas that you have when you're younger, they hold on. Like we hold on to them sometimes accidentally. And you can find yourself sometimes in a position where you have to sort it out. You have to sort it out. You make decisions that are maybe in opposition of other things that you thought would be the case, right? Like, you go to baking school and then you find out you're a diabetic. You're gonna have to, like, reconcile that to make
Yeah.
it all work, right? And so that's the reason that I think about it, because my nuts and bolts feeling is that our happiness and our contentedness as adults is possible in a bunch of different constructs with our family, right?
Yeah.
Like so that's the reason I ask. But let's talk about vocabulary.
Mhm.
How do you feel about the word stepmom?
Yeah. Because I I have been in the empowerment industry for a long time and tapped into this word and this way of being since I was little, nothing rattles me too much.
Okay.
My parents got divorced when I was one, and
Okay.
the most amazing step parents. My stepdad has passed away, but he died at 90. I am one of those rare outliers. I am blessed and grateful that my parents got divorced and found their person outside of the union to bring me into this world. So I'm really lucky. I mean, my dad and my stepmom have been married over 50 years. My mom, same thing. It was just, I think. And my cousins and aunts and uncles, there was a lot of it around. We always had this really unique way of hearing that there were challenges, but there was always love in our family, big holidays and gatherings. So even though there were stepmom, stepdad, stepbrother, stepsister, none of it just
I
it
love
didn't
it.
come into play in a negative way. We were aware of it,
Right.
but it wasn't a negative.
I think that's beautiful. I
Mhm.
if I could have written it out and said, this is what I want you to say, Lloyd. This would have been like, because I think that that's a really beautiful concept. And I think that one of the reasons that I started looking for people to interview is that when I began to mentor and coach step parents, I obviously only knew my own story, really.
Mhm.
Like that's the only one I'd lived. And my parents were divorced when I was young too. So I had a really open concept to marriage and divorce and, and the possibility because, people will tell you all the time, oh, well, this is because your parents were divorced. And I was never like, as an adult, I was like, I think they've got this backwards. I was like, I think that, the stuff before the divorce was
Right.
probably the problem. Like
Yeah.
the divorce was the beginning of the solution, right?
Yes.
And that's not always true, but I think that we don't hear those stories as often as we could. And so like, the people having positive relationships with their step parents and then positive concept of step parenting before they get started and then experience dealing with, the challenges of living with other people and blending a family. So, okay, so you're in Connecticut. You guys
Mhm.
started dating your boyfriend at the time, hooked up by your mom, the matchmaker extraordinaire.
She loves that.
Um,
That's her claim to fame.
that's so good. That's so good. But you guys all live in, did they move up to Connecticut to be with you?
Yeah, so they were in Florida, and I would for a year I would fly down like every month, and my mom was already there, and so it was pretty cool. We had family and friends. My brother lived there, for 20 years before, and then yes, then I was going to move down there, which was wonderful, but I had a business here, and I was established here too, but I was pretty open. And then I said, you know what? I think it's better if you guys come up here. I think it'd be better for the dynamics and the healing, and certainly where I saw the family going, just a little bit more groundedness here. And it was an amazing decision, all the way around. I have always trusted my instincts and my intuition. Luckily, my husband, boyfriend at that time, sounds so weird to say boyfriend.
Right. It's hard to tell these stories,
I
these love
know it's
stories.
so weird. He, trusted in me and how I looked at life and knew that I was going to be, a powerhouse for these girls and raise them in a more strict, traditional environment. He's a little bit more relaxed and chill, which was a great balance. He's from France and has traveled and speaks languages and does his thing. But again, not, I'm sure if you talk to my children, they might say things differently. And as they get older, right, they look back and, well, you should have and could have. And I went through, I don't think I ever saw myself as a step mom. And that may be something very unique to the listening audience. I'm a mom, period. My energetic structure is a mother. I had to nurture and take care of these children. They were in my care, whether I held them in my belly and born them out into the world, or I
Yeah.
really gave birth to them from my heart, it was the same. And even the second time I met them, I knew, especially my little one, Miss JD, I knew we had a very specific relationship to live out. And I came home, and the way I spoke about them, all of my family, all of my friends, everyone knew, like, these are your children. It was that way. Again, we have not been without challenges. We have a
Right.
real typical family. It's my mindset, it's the way I move through my life that I'm expressing, but we're a very regular family. Two girls growing up in this environment out in the world with social media. So,
Which is how, can I ask how old they are now?
yeah, 20 and 23.
Oh, so yeah, they're
Yeah.
really they grew up they're fully immersed in the
Yeah.
it definitely can be challenging the
Mm.
nonstop impact of social media. No, it's a whole thing. So, all right, so you guys moved up. I want to ask you we'll talk about some of the things that were hard in the beginning. This is sort of a very specific question, but did you have a home that they all moved into, or did you guys move into a new residence altogether, which was new
Yeah.
to
So
everybody?
I had an apartment in a big old historical building, and actually took my dining room apart and created a bedroom for them because I was
Okay.
single, of course. Um, and then we stayed there for about I think 2 years.
Okay.
And then we bought the house that we're in now. And, we looked at it as a family and, chose this neighborhood for them and the school system and all of that. So we really created, the apartment was lovely and lots of memories there, but really created this home, for the family. And this is where we've been.
Very nice. Yeah. So like there are times where I look back in the rearview mirror. I always tell people I was like 25 years ago, I did not know what I was doing. And I did not know that in the future I would be offering to walk people through this process. But there are some sort of sliding door moments that I can look back and see where our comfort level together shifted when we shifted from like, so for example, when we first moved in together, we kept he was then my boyfriend, my husband's couches.
Hmm.
And we had not conflict is the right word, but I don't want to overstate it, right? But there were like skirmishes over where people sat on the couch and, you're sitting in my spot and all those things. Then, totally unrelated to the conflicts, but just, process of the family, we bought new couches. And almost as if it like dissolved sugar in the water, those conflicts over the seats changed. They just disappeared because they were tied to that was their couch.
Yeah.
Like that was their couch and we just moved it. I didn't know the
Yeah.
science stuff like that. So like there's these it's I think that there's some not everybody can do it, but there's definitely a layer which is when one person moves into another person's house versus we all, and you use the word create. It's really interesting. It's like we picked it together and we created this in this house versus that looking forward and creating things together as a new family. So
And
that's
I
good.
think that's important, at least I mean, not everyone can afford to sell a house and
Right.
disrupt their families. And maybe if you're the single person, or, maybe you have one young person and you're in a condo I understand there's so many variables here, but I really do think that was an important factor, creating a home that really was all of ours, brand new, together, made a difference. And I think what also was a positive for me is they were young. They were
Yeah.
so young when I had them. I mean, they weren't babies, but they were, under 10, both of them. JD was, 5. And so I think, and also because the dynamics, right, with their biological parents was already so fragmented, that probably the space that I filled really mattered to them. It confused the older one a little bit more. That's a gentle age at 10, but my little one, like, she called me mama the second time I was with her. So that kind of tells you some things without getting too much into the, the
Yeah.
behavioral aspects of it. But I think, I mean, I can only imagine the experiences that you have heard. Blended is the word. And as we know, in a blender, we can throw a lot of things in
Yeah.
there and how it comes out,
Yeah.
depending on the recipe. So I think, each family is so unique. And there's positive and negative aspects to each blending of the family, that things
Yeah.
that can work really beautifully and some things that, are quite challenging.
No, 100%. I mean, we use the word blended all the time, but I think it can be as a description, it can be what do I mean? It's not a great description because we don't take everybody into a blender and then everybody becomes all alike, right? So like if when you make a smoothie, throw all the fruits in and then it becomes like one homogeneous like
Right.
color. It's like red goes in and blue goes in and then you have a purple smoothie.
Right.
And in a family, a big part for me in my own experience and something I think is helpful is that part of that is allowing everybody to be their own person and really honoring their own unique personalities as they grow as people and so on and so forth. And, and so it's some, if you want to puree it and have everybody be, that
Yeah.
one uniform thing, sometimes that's where the push comes, and so, but it is the word we use. It definitely is. And I don't have a better word to propose.
Yeah.
I don't. So, all right. So very good. So when they moved to Connecticut, Did you become full time, or was there long distance interaction with the other parent occasionally,
It was
phone
very
communications?
minimal. Yeah, the communication was horrific.
You don't have to go into it if you don't
Yeah.
want. So I
Yeah,
mean, so
it was it again challenging to say the least on her end. We did our best to bring the children to see her, to try to, but yeah, we worked it as best we could in the moments. And then, due to the biological mother's moves and all what she was doing, it was actually a blessing when she was far away and we couldn't really get the kids there, and it allowed us to calm things down and be and really focus on the four of us without this added friction. And I think if there's parents, step parents, and bio parents that are somewhat balanced and have done the work on themselves and are not literally unloading the baggage onto, the extension of these families, it can be a very beautiful experience. But most of us barely accept ourselves, let alone other people. And then we move all of that energy into one box, and
yes.
then we're trying to figure it out. And that's where, right, the disconnect starts to happen. And then all the blame and the shame and the guilt and all of the beautiful human condition
Yes.
settles in. But we did the best we could and we worked with it. And then there was a moment that I put my foot down and I stopped. And then I stopped trying to reach out and be the voice of reason and telling her how to be an actual mother to her children. And I stopped communication pretty much from that point on.
Okay. All right. How long ago was that?
Oof. Uh, 1920. Oh, 6 years ago, maybe.
So that okay. So the all right. So very good. So when you were talking about bringing everybody's energy into one box, and that's
Yeah.
where things are. The way when I say that, I would say living together with the other people is
Mhm.
very hard. It's
Yeah.
very hard. And, and then when we do that in terms of a remarriage with kids, it's intense because it all happens at once, right? So
Yeah.
you don't go from one person to two people to like two people and a little lump of sleeping baby for a year. You go instantaneously from one person in the house, you had your apartment, to four people with different personalities and different favorite foods and different sleep habits and, all of those things. And it's a rapid, challenging situation. What were some of the, aside from it sounds like there was a complex separation of the first marriage, of your husband's marriage, and that can be very complicated. But other than that, what were some of the challenges you remember from the beginning?
Yeah, nothing really personally between me and my husband. And again, it wasn't even really me and the girls per se. It was really I'm going to use my terminology, the structure of energy that the biological mother kind of infused in. And so when, we were trying to do the right thing, for instance, I remember we dropped our eldest daughter off in New York to visit the biological parent. And we came back to pick her up, and she was dressed completely different, and the makeup it was just a transformation of like control. And I recognized it quickly that the bio mom was like, my kid, I'm going to make her look like me. I just, Bruce, my husband, Bruce and I, we had to talk about it, and we just were like, oh dear Lord, this is not correct, because it was confusing to our eldest. And then I had to put aside my own perception and reaction and think with intelligence and respond, and just say it's a way that your mom's trying to be close to you and it's okay, and things of that nature, that very displaced control coming from an outside force that had no understanding of the day-to-day breakdown of school and emotions and feeding and nurturing, accountability, and just really looked at these little humans as playthings and toys and mini me's, with no care and consideration into the mental and emotional well-being of these children. So when we got them back, we had to almost deprogram what was programmed in. So it looking at it in that way was challenging. But again, pretty soon I started to see the pattern and I started to rectify it and almost load information into my children's brains before they would go visit the bio mom and let them know you are empowered. You can have a voice, you can express your feelings. And if you want to have fun and go with the flow, that's okay. There's no judgment here when you come back in the car with, dad and I, it's all good. And eventually they started expressing themselves, which was one of the big breakdowns between the biological mother and the children themselves as they started moving into their early teens and they started seeing and thinking for themselves. They were quite aware of, geez, every time we get with mom, all she does is talk about herself. She doesn't ever ask, how are we? What are we doing? Anything about school, friends, sports, holidays. It was very self-serving. So pretty soon I was able to back off and
Okay.
it
Yeah.
spoke for itself.
Yeah. I mean, there are almost always going to be at least some, I'll use the word culture differences between the house.
Mm.
And that's not even like between the different houses. So, and that's also true in families where there hasn't been remarriage. Like if you look at, grandma's house
Yeah,
has different culture than mom and dad's house, right? Go to grandma's house, you might get extra dessert, you get to stay up late. Grandma has different rules, right?
yeah,
And so there's always that, and kids are very good at being able, people are very
yeah,
good at being able to understand that there's different cultures in different places. And then there is a difference, right? So like kids learn very early that the librarian at school has different rules than the gym teacher, and the rules at school are different than the rules at home. Like we're, in a restaurant we do different things than we do at home. Like most people learn that, but when one of the elements, any of those places, is not necessarily productive or
mm,
supportive or constructive, which I think is what you were describing, like they were struggling in one of those, that adds, that adds a different layer. So like I'm like in every, I don't think there's any family with remarriage and separation where there's not at least a little bit of difference between the houses. But when we're talking about like, hey, could you do bedtime at 8 instead of 8:30? That's one conversation. And when it's a really, really harmful environment where there's, where they're not being listened to, they're being controlled, um, then, or there's somebody's engaging in unhealthy behavior,
yeah,
that's a whole other level
yeah,
of challenge, which it sounds like is a little bit of what you had going on.
yeah. And it was a very unique situation too, because my husband and I never missed a beat. He and I, it was like clockwork. And the children and I, pretty much the same thing. Again, the four of us, we were good. It's when that outside influence was introduced in, rightfully so, with their little hearts and minds being,
Yeah.
wanting to be close. But that's again where there was a specific conversation, and that's that moment that I knew no. And I jumped in and I really started to protect them the best I could. Looking back, right, you can do things differently, or you would have done things differently. But in those moments, in that time frame, I really did the best that I could and explained to them, this is not correct. This
Yeah.
is not. Someday you will grow up and be a young woman and maybe even a mother or a step parent. And again, that caring consideration, that genuine, authentic, heartfelt love should be present, and it isn't. And it did cause, those ripples, but I'm a very strong human and I'm very grounded in love for my children, and that's what they knew. Even now as they're young adults, we talk, they still, well, this could have been, or maybe this different, but you love us, you have our back, and that's what we needed, and that's what mattered. Even if they didn't quite understand all of what was being played out. But,
Yeah.
again, as you were saying, I think different stages, different ages,
Yep.
different scenarios. I have many, many friends who went through divorces, and some of them really flow nicely, and some of them are still disrupted, and people are in their 30s and the parents never got over it. It's really comes down to individual love for self, and the healing that we do, and being aware of not messing with our children and trying to just do
Yeah.
better and be better for them, and explaining to them that, mom and dad also have a relationship, that we're figuring out why we're loving all of you so much. And so I really think dialogue and conversation and tools and techniques and coaches and therapy and everything as step parents that we can grab onto and really try to build our knowledge base and just try our best to figure it out as we're moving through it.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that one of the things that's so confusing about the process, whether you're talking about like parenting or step parenting or grandparenting or whatever, is that we frequently are in a position to make a decision about something that feels very important when we don't know how it's going to work out in the future. And
Yeah.
most of us are not, most of us are people who did not study, family development as an academic nature. And also a lot of what's in those books doesn't work when you pull it out of of the book and put it in the house. But so there's that. But then the thing that I leaned into, which I think that is sort of where you were, is that I would trust myself. First of all, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I've made mistakes a million times. But I got to the point where I would, if I knew that my starting point, I was rooted in this is coming from love, right? Like, and that's where I try and start. And that doesn't mean for me that I'm like a pushover. Sometimes like rooted in love is doing really, really hard things. Like it's like, hey, I know, this is what you think you need, but this cannot happen anymore. Like it's, firm boundaries and stuff like that because this is a bad thing. So that's the way for me, sometimes that would be it took me a long time to trust myself with that.
Mm. Yeah, for for many reasons that I'm aware of, I did not struggle with that personally. I really felt connected to myself, but I also was an older stepmother and I've lived a lot of life. I wasn't 22 with a young baby and then moving in with two other kids. Again,
Yeah.
that's those variables, but I knew that I would give all of my heart and the best of my mind and what I was capable of. And I would tell them all the time, I still do. I'm not telling you who to be. I'm offering guidance, right? A navigation system, if you will. You don't have to follow it, but do your best to respect it because it comes from love and positive direction. Make up your own mind. But I would tell them that even when they were little. I'm not going to get this all right. Whether you were mine out of my belly or you
Yes.
came to me in this way, I love you. You are my daughters. You will be my daughters forever. I'm going to raise you to the best of my ability. It will not always be perfect, but it is from love. And our youngest one still is here. She's a Spitfire, and we still go through this, because kids take things as you're trying to control or you're trying to direct, but it's no, we've been there. We're just offering conversation. I trust that you can take what you need and do what's right for yourself. And that's how I've always tried just to raise them, even when they were little.
I think that's very I think that's very advanced. I don't know if that's the right word for it. Like, so I think that that's a very powerful way to do things. But I think that a lot of people, especially you touched on this when we talk about working on ourselves, right? Like, so when we all have our past experience, our story of origin, good, bad, nothing, neutral, good and bad that we experience. And when we see things that are this is not a perfect word, but unhealed
Yeah.
from our past, like projected on our children, like we get into our head that they might be repeating something that we've done. Often it's really hard to tamp down that, like, oh my gosh, please don't make the same mistake I did. I read one time like a little parenting meme, and it's like it's very hard to parent yourself out of your kids. It's
I
like
love that. And isn't that what we all do in
it's
our
what we
own
try.
way?
Yeah, that's what we try. Like so they and everybody's got their own different experiences. So I think that when people have, and I also think that there's a lot of pressure, societal pressure on parents
Mm.
to that there is some way to get it right and perfect. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to parents who are further down, parents and step parents, adults who are further down the process, taking the role of the wise one and saying, yeah, no, you know what? Actually, that's not possible. Like embracing the reality that the best you can means that sometimes you're going to make a mistake. You're going to burn the toast. You're going to be late to school. You're going to you're going to suggest that they should play the clarinet when they hate the clarinet. They're
Viola.
right, whatever it might be, right? Whatever it might be. You're going to put them in tennis lessons and they're going to,
Yeah.
complain about it for 12 years. You're going to send them to school and the nurse will call and say, you know what? They've got pink eye. All of those things. So I think there's a lot of advantage in that. And I want to thank you for sharing it. But I want to touch on the fact that I think that you are, um, that it is a skill that you have brought to the table that not everybody does. Some of us learn it as we go. Like,
And I certainly did. I certainly did. Yes, my way of thinking in the world is advanced. I kind of popped into the world in this way, but again, I was not without the challenges and all the trials
yeah,
and working through it. But I did stay firm in what I valued and the traditions of family and what that meant to me. And whether it's holidays
right.
or making your bed every morning for that simple act of a disciplined mindset, whatever it is that I brought in. But that's why I think coaching and therapies and books and podcasts are so important for those of us that are out there unhealed, trying to navigate some really unique challenges when we really just want happiness and love and calm. We all get it. We've been there. We still are there, but tools and techniques are available, even lots of free stuff that can
Yeah,
help those moms and dads, I think, struggling. And again, even you can be, I have friends that are PhDs in every style of psychological advanced ways of thinking, and their families are messy too. It's
right.
not answers, it's just try things again and again, but always follow your heart and that gut feeling of what really at the end of the day is important. And I stayed true to bringing a more strict, more framework of boundaries and tradition and family and holidays or things of that nature, a little bit more disciplined, that I, told them someday you can move out and let all hell break loose if you'd like. But while you're here, this is my best and this is what I'm giving you and I'm presenting. And I hope that you will respect it enough to try it. It will benefit you somewhere out. And a side note to any young adults listening, my almost 24-year-old now, who has been out of the house for a year, calls me all the time and asks me for all kinds of advice. I help her do things that, right, there was a struggle way before. So it does pay off to the moms and dads that are really trying to hold it together. For the most part, there will be a moment of gratitude and appreciation. Just
Yeah.
hold steady.
You never want to like guarantee that that'll happen because like it doesn't, like
Yeah, that's
it doesn't
true.
happen. But I appreciate it when it does for sure. But I wouldn't, I would not want to have anybody, I would not, you don't want to have anybody waiting for it. I wouldn't want to live waiting
Yes.
for that, like, thank you. But one of the kids called me once and said, oh, I looked down at my plate and I realized this was a meal you would have made, like a lean protein and a
Oh, yes.
vegetable,
See?
right? And like I would not have wanted to wait for that to come back.
Right,
But for years, there's like, that's not the most popular dinner. They like the yummy comfort food, but
right,
and not the real, just day in, day out, there's always a green veggie on the plate.
right.
But all right, so when you talk about that, so it sounds like you have you had some pretty set standards of things that you thought was important for the culture of the house, like inside your house, like chores during the day, participation in family tradition, stuff like that. When you say strict, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and also I have two girls, and so you know, again, growing up in this social influenced environment, it was important for me to try to teach them self-respect and dignity and body image and
Yeah.
you know how they dress and how they're presenting themselves to the world. And that was a very big struggle because that is not what they grew up with. Their social media was very risque, over sexualized, the videos, the influencers, you know, in trying to hold them again steady in that, you know, kind of walk softly, speak softly. You don't need to put it all out there right at the get-go. I would say that probably was one of my biggest challenges raising two young girls.
It was,
Really, again,
what part of Florida were they in? Were they in South Florida? I'm in South Florida.
Daytona Beach
Daytona.
area.
It is like it is, so I'm in Miami,
Yeah.
and it
Oh,
definitely is like, we first of all, it's hot here all year long.
yep.
You know, we have a completely different concept of what being clothed means.
Yeah.
Like a tank top is a perfectly acceptable
Yeah.
piece of apparel over a swimsuit in most places. And that does not translate in the rest of, you know, in many other places. And all of my, and so I is definitely a, and we do have a very showy,
Very.
culture here in Miami,
My
very
husband
formative
lived
culture. Yeah.
in Miami. One of my daughters was born there. The other
Yeah.
thing too to take into consideration is my daughters are French, and
Yeah.
they used to travel to France. They were very open. My husband, they
Yeah.
still speak the language. There's a very fluid, very beautiful sensuality about the
Yeah.
culture also. But again, young ladies and teaching them that nuance when their brain is being seeded with imagery and sexuality and you
Yeah.
know it was challenging but
It's
yes you
definitely like, and to put it, to learn how to, yeah, no, and yeah, it is. All four of my kids have gone through the awareness that, you know, what flies on South Beach does not fly, you know, when visiting the Vatican or St. Peter's. It's like,
yes
and you just kind of have to be aware of it, you know, like, you know, we never like, so I don't know if anybody wears pantyhose anymore in the world, right?
right
But can you imagine trying to wear them in Miami in the summer? It would
no
be, you know, right? So that's like, it's like, it would be horrific, right? And yet in any other, you know that, you know, you're going to want tights in Wisconsin in the winter. Like,
yeah
people are going
absolutely
to judge you when they have a different thing. So that would be, so okay, I've got a feel for that. And when so you came from a family where the step parents and the parents and the large family, they were sort of all just in the fold, creating like a big fabric of a family, a tapestry of a family. So then when you were put in the position where you were considering, you know, really putting some distance between the parent and you, or and maybe even the parent and the kids, was that a hard decision to come to? Like, did you struggle with the, is it my job to help protect the relationship between the parent and the kids, or what went on there?
yeah and side note too my mom and my dad my bio parents they weren't really great and connected when I was a kid but my
Okay, so
stepfather came in and I had such a love of family, but they always made sure I saw my dad and you know, then my stepmom was his girlfriend and so there was continuity, but you know, there were moments that my mom would say something negative about my dad and you know,
yeah,
all of what happened way back in the day. Again, just to let the listening audience know, by no means was everything, you know, perfect and cherry here. Um, Yes and no. I didn't struggle with the decision to protect my girls against their biological mom, because I really felt that she wasn't consciously and on purpose trying to create anything in a negative way. It just was who she was. And I saw that when we would get them back from any time with her, they were not their happy, grounded or balanced, normal little self. So I started to recognize that something is not quite right. And so it wasn't very difficult for me to let them know going forward, because they used to say, well, especially my oldest one, well, you hate my mom. No, Lovey, I do not. I'm grateful she brought you into this world. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have you. But I will be honest with you, as a woman to a woman, a mother to a mother, I do not respect her. And someday you will understand that, and I will do my best to tell you why if you need to know. And we kind of had these dialogues. It was easier for them to be like, well, you hate her. And then I would have to explain, no. But are you happy when you're with her? Do you feel loved? Are you safe? Do you feel comfortable? And when you come
Yeah.
home to the pups and you guys are always upset. So something's not right. And it's my job to protect you and do my best to help you navigate this. And we still, up until just a few years ago, even with my eldest one, we still had these conversations because she personally was trying to have a relationship with her bio mom. They do, it's limited, doesn't go very deep. And, when she turned about 20, I said, you're on your own now. You're a big girl. You make your decisions and I will support you. But we don't really talk about her, the biological mother, very much at all. I recently asked her, have you talked to her? Is she okay? How are things going? She had something very tragic happen in her life. And I let them know, like we care about her well-being. We don't want her to be sick and unhealthy and unloved, but she just really wasn't a good mom. It's just that
Yeah, yeah.
simple.
That's too bad. Yeah, people I talk to, there's a lot of people who there's a lot of families who struggle with trying to with the wish that somebody in their family would behave in a way that they're not.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so, I wish that, like, it can be us with our own parents. Like, I wish my parents were different, like you're wishing that they did things. It can be a parent to a child, like, really, oh, I wish that they were doing different things. Like, and then we have this illusion of like of us being able to change it. And when that person is the extended thing, whether it's in-laws or a former spouse, that can be a very frustrating scenario. Like when you've got somebody who, I'll give a conflict situation that's not very emotionally loaded, which is pretty common, which is one house has a very like rigorous look at school and homework,
Mhm.
and the other house does not. And so you've got one house saying, "Oh, I really just you're doing this wrong. You need to be doing this differently." And the other house is just like not participating. They're like, "Nope, we don't agree. We're not doing it." And it creates this. And there is a point where, you can't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it. It's like if they're not going to participate on a certain level, there's a limit to how much you can do to force them to comply.
Well, this is where I come in and I would empower the children.
Right.
You have the choice. We're giving you're doesn't matter who it's coming from and what the environment is, you're being given two options. And you can choose to study and be smart, or you can choose to be relaxed on it. And let me show you what happens when you're relaxed on your studies and when you actually empower your studies. Then go for it. And then you still do the best. You don't want them to fail and flunk out of school. You do the best to let them know, even if you go over to Auntie Elizabeth's house and she's wicked chill on your studies for the weekend.
Yeah.
And you know what? You can still take an hour and rock that study time and have a good time eating popcorn and watching movies.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I find that. And kids they're resilient and they do know they still may choose, right, to take the easy path out, but giving them the what I call the power seat of choice,
Yeah.
empowering them, they tend to start to get it. And if you're
They do.
consistent, because you're authentic in that structure or that value system, they start to pick up on it.
Yeah, there's a point it does get easier when the kids are able to impact autonomy. Little kids who are really at the mercy of the schedules and the environment of their kids have a slightly different environment, but because they do have more agency over their decisions, they can look and say, you know what, I'm putting myself to bed because I have to get up in the morning. But small kids are be there. But yeah, no, and so yeah, and you mentioned this in an earlier story that you were before they would go, you would do the work with them so that they had a sense of empowerment. And so the being, I mean, that was a choice you had, right? Being willing to do that beforehand, choosing to be aware of it, choosing to come up with a theory. That's a lot of work that you took on
Yeah.
to do that. Did it feel like a lot of work at the time?
Yeah, yes, yes, in all honesty, but no, because it was a natural extension of who I am and how I felt. And I knew that blaming outside
Right.
circumstances, conditions, and influences was only going to make it more messy. And so I wanted to really start to equip them with that feeling of, you can, I don't care if you're 7, you're strong. You've got some girl power going on. You can
Yeah.
make this choice. You can express your words. And if you need me, and believe it or not, there were many times that they would call and they would be like, literally hours later, can we come home? And we'd be like, it's okay, just catch your breath, let's relax, let's talk about it for a minute and see and try, because we really wanted them to have some connection because it
Right.
was so important. But it didn't work anyways, no matter which way we moved, because we had no influence over that particular person. But
Right.
again, given time, they really are showing those parts that were really quite challenging for me. That amount of work that I put into raising good human beings. Like you said, you can't wait for it. A little part of your heart hopes and wishes you did it the right way because you want them to go out into the world and feel confident and know what self-love actually is. But as they get older, it is quite remarkable to see that they did take on some of the seeding, and they are flourishing in some of the ways that selfishly were important to me. But knowing that when they need something, they reach back out. We've been on the phone with our daughter who lives in Tampa right now, going through some stuff. And we're on the phone, both of us, mom and dad, right there, and a family and the dynamics. And she knows, like, I can call them. They will help me. They've got good wisdom and guidance and experience. And that matters to her, and it matters to us that she knows that she can trust, and we're here for her.
That's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, that you touched on it because when I was asking you earlier about, did you feel, um, a desire to protect that relationship between, and you said you like you did want him to have a relationship, and I think that that is one of the places where people can struggle. I always remind people that, not every adult, we sometimes can really, put a lot of pressure on this biological connection
Yeah.
between people, but not every biological parent uh, does that, which we know because, there's people who are removed and put into foster care, and there are people who, I mean, it's just not, it's not as automatic as you might wish that it was. And where that shows up on the opposite side is if you have somebody who is part of a family who's like, I just wish this other person would do this,
Mm.
and it's not everybody feels that way. Not everybody feels that way, and that can be a tough spot to be. Yeah, no, I'm
And
glad
there's
that you
moms
shared
and
that.
dads, right? I was super hands-on. Again, my husband was really kind of chill. And there was a moment where I was like, let's go, come a little more forward, meet me here. This is a lot, like this is all brand new. But he, always looked at me like, you're just a force. You've got this. But there were times where, it was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is a lot. But again, communication, I think, between the adults to the very best of our ability,
Yeah.
especially those of us that are at the helm of that family dynamic, and really do your best to stay united, not against the parent that's over there anymore, but
Right.
united in how your love and your raising this family can be. And I think that that helps when the two of you aren't against the ex-wife or the ex-husband. It's we're all just trying to do the best we can.
Right.
And let's
Yeah.
give each
Yeah.
other some space and some love even if it doesn't, I mean, unless it's bad things and tragedy and abuses, oh, that's a different story. But if it's like, look, we're doing us, you do you, but let's think about these innocent humans that we have in the middle, and let's really come together and do what is best for them to the best of our ability. And I think if we're all trying to communicate and do that, we have a better chance than if we're looking at each other and blaming and shaming.
Yeah, no, family life moves fast. Families are complicated structures, right? And it's a it is really a helpful tool to try and keep the focus on, future, like what are we doing versus
Yeah.
what has happened. It's very, very hard to implement in the moment in practical sense, but it's a powerful, powerful tool. So it's like it's very easy to get fixated on what happened an hour ago and 10 minutes ago. And sometimes it needs your attention. But that moment that you shift and say, okay, that's what happened an hour ago, and now what we need to do now, an hour ago you fell on your skateboard and you got hurt, and sure, somebody should have called sooner or whatever, but right now what we need to do is focus on what we're doing next. And that's so many times that's a switch that is really helpful. And the other thing that I'll ask you like is because I think that there's power in realizing that you probably don't know exactly how to have these conversations and this communication. It's a thing that you develop as part of being in the family. It's like, it's like that nobody arrives in the family with the inherent knowledge of how to, bring everybody together on, family dinner for 10 years, in agreement, like that's a skill. And when we open ourselves up to it, it's like, oh, it's okay that I don't know how to do this because now I can begin to learn how to do this. Now I can begin to learn how to have these tough conversations and fill this with love.
And learning is exciting, and it's an empowering real-time experience. It's okay to say, I'm vulnerable here. I
Yeah.
don't know exactly how to handle all of this. Again, we're my husband and our youngest daughter, who's 20, the three of us, our dynamics, we still are healing and growing and evolving weekly. She's got her own unique way of being in this world, and I'm learning to let go more. My husband's learning to interact more. He's healing things because their dynamics are unique. Again, I think if everyone just looks at, we're in this human condition together. We are a product of someone else's thinking. I always talk about how we're these walking algorithms of other people's thought processes. So our great grandparents, our grandparents, our parents, our school system, religion, political, we're all just kind of taking in this data, and then we just output a lot of reaction. So
Yeah.
as a mom and a dad and all of our children, we have something unique. We actually are together. We share that. I always say we occupy the same cage.
Yeah.
How can we support each other? How can we empower and make one another feel amazing and special, seen and heard? We're not always going to agree. And as the adults in the room, we do have some direction over how this is going to play out. But we'll do our best to love you and care for you and give you space. It will not always be perfect. And sometimes the proverbial stuff will hit the fan, but we will work at it together. And as long as we stay together and we figure it out, we're going to be okay.
That is really good. This has been a great conversation. I'm thrilled to have gotten the chance to talk to you today and learn more about you and your family and how you brought this together and made it work. You had some challenges. And I think that a lot of people who are listening will resonate and take a lot away from this conversation. Before we sign off today, I want to give you a chance to tell people what you do, and how people can find you online.
Yeah, wonderful, Amy. And thank you. And I really appreciate and grateful for the work you're doing. It's so important because almost everyone I know is a blended family of sorts. And there's a lot of us out there that have never done the personal work, let alone the collective work to, I think, really advance our family dynamics in a positive way. So thank you for your work. And yes, people can find me www.thescienceofempowerment.com. There's so much information on the website. Even if you just read what's on there, your neuronal pathways will begin to wire differently. Certainly Amazon, the book, The Science of Empowerment, please get it. It is an absolute game changer for families and parents. It's not directed specifically towards them, but it has worked, honestly, some miracles in some very dysfunctional families. And I do a lot of thought energy coaching. And this is really understanding how energy is in everything, the way we think, the way we speak, the way we interact. And I really coach families and individuals on just changing the way we look at our position in the world and with one another and how we can empower our experiences. So thank you for this opportunity.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye.